When you're buying gear, I would highly recommend you make long-term investments. And what I mean by that is a lot of times people can be focused on the camera. That's the first and foremost thing, whether you're a photographer, videographer, or any other kind of production person. Most people like to look at the camera first because that's what creates the image and that's kind of the core, it's the bedrock. But what I think is more valuable is to look at all the other pieces around it and see what's going to last the longest and invest in those things. So, for example, what you could do is you could buy a whole lot of gear, right? Camera, tripod, audio, lights, the whole shebang. I made a video talking about basically the video production starter kit that I'll link to in the description below. You can go see all my recommendations on pretty much every piece of gear you would need to get started, the affordable stuff, right? You could buy all those things and start there. Now, what people like to do from that point, once they have everything they need, they like to upgrade the camera first. That seems to be what I see people do, and that's how I tend to lean as well. But what I think is more valuable is to look at those other pieces and see which ones are going to last the longest. Particular things like tripods, lights, audio equipment. These are the kind of things that don't get refreshed year to year and are pretty much going to last you as long as they last, as long as you treat them right. So for example, the first tripod that I ever bought is still the tripod I have. It's got a few dents on it and it's not in tip-top shape, but it still works really, really well, and it's a great fluid head tripod. Now, were there better options at the time that I could have had that now I would have an even better tripod? Absolutely. But I bought something that was really good, maybe a step up from the cheapest options, or maybe a couple step ups from the cheapest options, and it's lasted me a long time. The thing when you buy the cheap stuff, it tends to not last as long, and you'll find yourself, you'll upgrade to the one step above, and then you'll upgrade this one step above and upgrade one step above. If I were to go back, it would have been really nice to have bought the best tripod that I could have found, because I probably still have it, and it probably would serve me better now than even the one I have currently. Same thing for microphones and audio. Now, you do have to keep in mind that budget is always a concern. Obviously, people have different ranges of what they can afford to spend. But if you notice, I haven't talked about upgrading your camera. And that's because cameras get changed year to year, it feels like now. The speed at which this technology is advancing, sensors and cameras are just constantly coming out. Newer, higher frame rates, more dynamic range, better codecs. They're always changing, and you can kind of be chasing. It's almost like that iPhone syndrome where every time a new camera comes out, you feel like, oh, I need this to be better. And I've talked about this in other videos. Oftentimes you don't. You can usually get by with what you have. But my point is, if you invest $10,000 in a camera, that might be obsolete in 2 years. 2 years from down the road, and so you only have 2 years to pay off that $10,000 investment, compared to something like a tripod where you could invest, maybe you buy a $5,000 tripod, but that's going to last you like 20, 30 years if you stick with production. So now it's $5,000 over 20 years that you have to pay it off, rather than the $10,000 over 2. So really try and balance that stuff and keep it in mind, because what looks sexy, which is usually the camera, is really tempting, and that's what everyone wants. But the other stuff like your microphone and your stands and your lights can often last you a lot longer. And even though the investment might seem like a lot, $5,000 for a tripod seems a little crazy, and maybe you don't want to spend that much. But think about investing a little bit more in the things that aren't quite as sexy, because you may actually get more benefit in the long run. The first camera I bought, well, I guess that would be the DVX, no, not the DVX, HVX 200, and don't even use it anymore. And I think at the time it was around $5,000, and then I bought a GH1, hardly use that anymore, and now the GH4. So those are the cameras that I've bought over the course of my career, but certainly there's a lot of other cameras out there that other people buy a lot more frequently than I do, and you really have to make sure that that stuff pays itself off because of the constant refresh. From the HVX 200 to the GH1 to the GH4, it really hasn't been that long a period of time. Maybe, oh shoot, now I gotta do some math. Maybe like 10 years, a little over 10 years. that's a good chunk of time, but it's not it's not like what the tripod I got way back then is still the tripod I have now. So the tripod has lasted 3 cameras, and I haven't had to get a new one. At some point I probably will, but my point is in all of this is just make those long-term investments, the stuff that is going to last you a long time, that if you buy this piece of gear, it's going to work with any camera you throw at it, it's going to work with any situation you throw at it, and then it can pay itself off, and you can those are the workhorse items, you can just use them over and over again. They're the things you don't have to rent because you buy and you just have in your kit. The cameras is kind of the realm of, it's like rental territory. I've made other videos talking about this, but cameras, there's some really expensive ones that have some really nice features. You don't have to buy those. You can rent them for the project. Maybe you have a couple projects where you need it, and everything else you can get by with something cheaper. Do that. Don't spend a ton of money investing in a system that's going to be outdated in 2 years. Even Red, for all their talk about, obsolescence, obsolete, like, they still come out with new stuff that isn't backwards compatible with the old stuff, and the Red fanboys and stuff will tell you how great those systems are, and I love the Red cameras, but even they are trying to make this modular system that it lasts for a really long period of time, and it just doesn't. Yes, they have their upgrade programs, but I think the idea that most people want is, I want a box that I can upgrade the components on as time goes by. But the thing is, technology changes too much. These cameras now are all electronics. Whereas tripods, light stands, lights, in most cases, these are all hardware things. So the camera is electronic driven, software driven, everything else is hardware driven. Even microphones, for the minimal electronics they have inside, they've kind of reached their peak. I don't see new microphones coming out where people get really excited about the extended dynamic range of the microphone. Yes, I'm sure audio guys get really excited about that stuff, but your average shooter isn't going to care, because you can get by with pretty much any decent microphone will do you a good job, just like any decent camera nowadays will do a pretty good job. So make those smart investments that are going to last a lifetime, hopefully. Probably won't last a lifetime, but those longer term investments, so that you spend a little bit more money on the front end that you might not be so excited about, but then it's spent and you have the next 20 years and the next 30 years to not worry about it, and just to have that solid as a rock piece of kit that isn't going to let you down.